Before this video even starts, I just want to say that yes, I know I'm like a month late covering this game. I had to make sure that my opinions were accurately judged. And I might have been a little bit lazy, okay? I'll be honest. I was a little bit lazy. But moving past that now, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, leave me a like, and leave a comment telling me what I should do next if you want. I'm always down to try a suggestion. With all that said, here's my review of Splatoon 3. So if you don't know, Splatoon is a fairly new franchise from Nintendo, and a quick rundown of the game is, you're a kid that can also turn into a squid, or an octopus depending on if you're an inkling or an octoling, and you live in a big city. In the first two games, the city is Inkopolis, and in the third it's Splatsville. And in these cities, you take part in a number of different game modes that range from turf battles, where your team tries to cover more turf than the enemy team within 3 minutes, to fighting anthropomorphic salmon and stealing their eggs to help out a shady business in Salmon Run. Equipped all the time with the most deadly paintball-ish guns known to man, turning into a squid and swimming through ink, all the while earning money, buying clothes, and just overall having a good time. I know that wasn't the best rundown of the game, but if you want to understand more, then watch some gameplay of it, or just play it for yourself, because it's a really good game. Now the first thing I'm going to talk about is the game's story mode. And it also happens to be the best story mode out of all the games, not including the auto expansion. Now I won't spoil what happens in it, unlike how I got spoiled, but I will say that if you were dissatisfied with the first two game story modes, then don't expect too much more from this one, or else you might feel let down, but do know that it is better than both of them, and I had a blast playing it from start to end. It's mostly comprised of pretty short levels where your main objective can range anywhere from getting to the end of a level, to destroying all the cubes, to trying to complete a level with a certain amount of shots taken. The majority of the levels are just about getting to the end, but I still like them. Throughout all of these levels, as you're defeating the Octarians and collecting items, you're gaining Salmonoid power eggs, which you use to gain access to new areas, which I thought was a really satisfying progression system. And other than these normal levels, there's boss fights, which in terms of boss fights, they weren't the best I've ever played. They made good use of the game mechanics and played really well with no issues though. They just lacked spectacle to me, which might have just been a me problem. Maybe I wanted too much from them, I don't know. Overall, the story mode was just a good improvement to the first two and a nice conclusion to them as well. And so that can only bode well for the rest of the game, right? The next thing I'll be talking about is the game mode that I think the majority of people will play the most, which is Turf War. Now, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, if I would have thought that one day I would play a game for hours on end where all you do is kill people and paint the ground, then I would have thought you were crazy. But Turf War is an absolute blast to play. I can't tell you how many hours of it I've played. The premise is simple. You have 3 minutes and your goal is to cover as much turf with your team's color ink and prevent the other team from covering as much, by either killing them or just covering up what they've painted, and whichever team has the most ink on the ground at the end of those 3 minutes wins. And man, is it an addictive loop. It's always satisfying to just cover turf, and that's the best part. Even if you're not so good at actually aiming, then you can still be useful just by going around and trying to cover as much ground as possible. It's such an easy game mode to just pick up and play, and it can be welcoming for old and new players. Although the skill-based matchmaking can be non-existent sometimes, with either your team absolutely destroying the other team, or your team barely being able to get out of your spawn. But if that's not happening, then it's a really fun game mode to play. Although there are occasional hiccups with the matchmaking, but that's more of just Nintendo's fault rather than Splatoon itself. Still worth pointing out though, since it does affect the experience. On top of the Turf War game mode, another game mode that really stands out are the Anarchy battles. These battles are for the people who take the game more seriously, and there's a little variety in these game modes too. There's a push the payload type of game mode, where both teams are trying to push a tower to the other side of the map without letting the other team get there first. Splat zones, where each team is fighting for a tiny section of the map until they win, and a few others. Also included is the seemingly unanimously disliked Clam Blitz, Now, unlike Turf Wars, I can't say I've played too much Anarchy Battles, because I'm simple, and I just like painting the ground. I also get a little scared to play it. But it's always a great alternative to Turf Wars if you ever need a break from it or if you want to try something new and possibly more challenging. Only one game mode being available at a time is a bit of an issue, but I'll touch on that more later. As for now, let's move on to what I consider the last big game mode of the game. And that game mode is Salmon Run! Salmon Run is a very different game mode from all the others. Instead of another team, you're fighting waves of salmonoids, which if you don't know what they are, just think of them as walking, or I guess waddling, sentient salmon. And your team's objective is to kill as many salmonoids as you can, steal their eggs, collect their eggs in a little cage type of thing, and survive until the end of all 3 rounds. It's kind of like COD Zombies, but it's also kind of nothing like them. Now these salmonoids can range anywhere from tiny little babies to giant monsters that come out of the ground, and every variety of the salmonoids have different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to exploit said weaknesses to beat them and win. There's also a boss salmonoid that can spawn at the end of the 3 rounds if you've played enough rounds, which is a really fun and unique idea. This game mode tends to be a favorite amongst players, but for me not so much. I don't know what it is about it, but I just can't get into it like some other people can, I suppose. And there's also a glitch that happens every time I play with my friend. At the end of Wave 3, every single time, he gets disconnected from the game, no matter what, and gets no experience or anything from it, and I don't know what the issue is, but it's just kind of annoying. But other than those 3 game modes, there's a few more things to do here. There's Table Turf Battles, which is a new game mode, and it's more or less just a quick distraction from the other game modes, where you play cards that have weapons and characters and whatnot on them. And they all have unique patterns, and you use those patterns to try and strategically outmaneuver your opponent and cover more spaces before you run out of turns, and also space. There's also special attacks that you can charge up and then attack your opponents with to cover their squares, losing them space and giving yourself more. I don't think this game was meant to be taken so seriously, but for what it is, it's a really good pastime for if you want to break from the normal game, or if you just want to get on and play this. Other than Table Turf Battles, there's really only one extra game mode, and it's the Shoal, but I really can't talk about it because I've never been able to play it. But from my understanding, it's a local wireless game mode where you just pop balloons or something like that. See, I really have no idea what it is. But of course, that's not everything in the game. I know that all I really mentioned that was new was the Table Turf Battles, but that's because most of the new things are mostly quality of life improvements and smaller things here and there. Now immediately when you start the game, you used to have to watch a news broadcast telling you all the current stages and game modes, which you wouldn't think would be much of an issue, but it really just slowed down the game. And it was mostly the same stuff every time, and while it's a nice touch, it gets really annoying after a few times. But in Splatoon 3, they did the unthinkable, and made that whole news broadcast skippable, or at least it's minimized to just some text in the corner of the screen, which is way better than having to watch the whole thing every single time that you started the game. But one major change is the new Splatsville hub area. Just like how Inkopolis was the hub in Splatoon 1 and 2, Splatsville is the area that you load into when you first load into the game after you watch the news broadcast in Splatoon 3. And I think it's pretty much agreed on this is the best hub area they've made. It really feels like a living, breathing city with tons of people and pathways, and even high-up balconies that you can climb up and look out from. And on top of that, the lobbies from all the multiplayer game modes got updated. From being flat static screens to being playable rooms where you can practice your strategies and hang out with your teammates and friends that show up as holographic ghosts. I also heard that they've improved the ability to play with your friends, but since I never had anyone to play the first 2 games with, I can't really speak on how true that is, but I assume it's been made much easier since it was really easy for me and my friend to play together. And also in this lobby there's a locker room where you can customize your locker and view other players' lockers, which isn't a huge thing, but I still had fun customizing my locker and seeing what everybody's looked like. The game mostly plays the same here as it did in the first 2 games, but it has 2 new moves, the Squid Roll and the Squid Surge. I'm sure that in the right hands, these moves are amazing, but I really don't find myself in situations where these moves benefit me too much. But that's okay because I don't really need them to be decent at the game. And of course there's new maps. Now I'm not really one to know how good or bad a map layout is, so if you're looking for that then you gotta go somewhere else, I'm sorry. But for the most part, I liked all the new maps they introduced. I don't think they're the best maps they've ever made, but they're fun. And they've introduced 2 new weapon types, one being a katana type weapon called the Splatana, and another being a bow type called the Stringer. I personally love the Splatana, and it's mostly all I use, but I do hear that a lot of people dislike it. Maybe they're just bad with it, or maybe I'm crazy. And the Stringer is either going to be the best person on your team, or the worst, and there is no in between. So it's really a hit or miss, but it's a fun and unique enough weapon. I won't go on and on about all the changes in the game, but I will mention one more thing, which is the catalog. The catalog is kind of like a battle pass for most games, except it's free, and in it, of course, you have emotes, nameplate customizations, clothes, locker decorations, etc, etc. It's a good incentive to keep playing, especially since it's the time thing, and once it's gone, it'll presumably never come back. At least that's what I've gathered from it. Now, Splatoon wouldn't really be Splatoon without a few key things, and one of those things are the idols. In every game there's been idols. In Splatoon 1 it was Callie and Marie, in Splatoon 2 it was Pearl and Marina, and in Splatoon 3 we got Shiver, Fry, and Big Man. These 3 idols, in my opinion, are the best that we've gotten so far. They just have so much personality and they're all so distinct, and of course they play a role in the story mode, just like all of the idols. I know they're not everyone's favorite, but I think even if they're not your favorite, you can't really dislike them. One other thing that makes Splatoon are of course the Splatfests. As of the time of me writing this, there's been 2 so far, with a 3rd one coming next month, and instead of having 2 choices, there's 3 idols, and so there's 3 choices, which I feel makes it even more fun. And during these Splatfests, the whole hub area gets redecorated with bright lights and fun music, and floating floats that have the 3 idols riding them and performing music, and it really feels like a festival. And it gets me really excited and makes me want to play and win for my team, which I think is a great thing. During Splatfest, for the first 24 hours, it's just normal turf wars, but at the halfway mark, tricolor turf wars open up, and tricolor turf wars consist of all 3 teams battling it out for victory. The team that was announced to be in the lead at halftime gets put in the middle with 4 players, while the other 2 teams have 2 players each and invade the middle from both sides, trying to cover their turf and take the Ultra Signal. And the Ultra Signal activates well, I don't know what it is, but it inks a certain area indefinitely and can't be destroyed. A lot of people dislike this game mode because they feel it's unfair for the defending team, because it's just too hard for them, but the way I see it is, yeah, it's harder, but if your team is in the lead, it being harder is exactly what your team needs. But I can definitely see where they're coming from. I mean, I'm just used to losing, I guess. Pretty sure I've single-handedly sabotaged my team in both Splatfests to come in second, but that's just a me issue. Overall, Splatfests are just as great as ever to me and keep me invested in the game. One thing I think is going to be big, but we don't know yet, is Big Run. It's going to be kind of like a Splatfest, but with Salmon Run, where the Salmonoids take over the Splatlands and you have to fight them off on normal battle maps. But we haven't experienced this game mode yet, so I don't know how impactful it'll be to the overall community, but I guess we'll see. Now, what kind of a reviewer would I be if I didn't nitpick tiny little things about the game? Exactly, I wouldn't be one. So let's do just that. One thing I feel like a lot of people dislike are the map rotations, and I have to say I kinda agree. I think that it's a little annoying to only get to play 2 maps for 2 hours at a time, but I also think that it adds personality to the game, although it comes at the expense of some people's happiness. But one thing that certainly doesn't need to exist are the timed anarchy battles. I don't know how it feels exactly, but I can imagine wanting to get on and play some tower control only to see that the only thing I can play is Clam Blitz for the next 2 hours. I can imagine they did this so that the player base wasn't so divided, but it still is a little irritating. I've already talked about the connection issues, so I won't go over that too much more, but I do want to reiterate that they come up far more often than they really should, and once again, it's really a Nintendo issue, so I won't blame the game, but for a paid subscription, it's really subpar. And I don't want to talk about that many issues or I'll just sound overwhelmingly negative, so I'll skip to the chase and get to the end of this video. So pretty much, I think Splatoon 3 is a great sequel to Splatoon 2, and greatly surpasses it in many ways, if having a few issues. But even with the issues, it's a game that keeps me coming back time and time again, just because of how fun everything is in it, and that's what's really important. So if you haven't, I say pick up a copy, even if you're just a little bit interested in it, because really there's nothing else like it, and the longer you wait, the more you'll miss out on it. But anyways, that was my review of Splatoon 3. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.